It's Steam Next Fest October 24, which means I'm playing different genres of games and the demos inside them to see whether I liked them and whether they stayed on my wishlist. We're kicking off with a retro rally game in this racing selection because it's one of the few car games that were in the racing category. But sadly I was deeply disappointed. This game feels like it's been designed very bare bones and basic, and then someone slapped a retro filter on it and then gone, it's a retro game, and that does a disservice to retro games in general and the whole nostalgic look back. This feels more cash cowy, and I hate to be like that, but the filter that's been put on the game itself demakes the polygons and then puts a light shimmer on it as if you're playing a game when the sun's bouncing off the CRT screen, and it really hurt my eyes. And if you're not battling with that, then you're battling with the handling, which felt imprecise, very slow to turn, and it's as if there's an initial like jank where it's going to go in a certain direction, but then it just, the yaw of trying to get round was really like trying to roll a massive boulder and you've only got a couple of pair of hands. You're trying to build up momentum, and that doesn't help when you've got lots of switchback corners, tight hairpins, only 90-degree-ish corners. You couldn't get round them properly unless you ground to a real halt by smashing on the brake, and the brakes took a long time to actually do anything with. That on the top with the fact that you're given a big square environment and just the track itself is raised off of it. It just feels like someone's dumped and painted a track in an environment area and then just forgot everything else that's around the game. And so I found it deeply unsatisfying to play, and it didn't stay on my wish list. A game that certainly did stay on my wishlist though was Lonely Mountains Snow Riders, and I adore the original Lonely Mountains where you BMX bike your way down various different hills, trying not to crash and doing it in the fastest time possible. And the beauty of this one is that changing it into a snowy mountain and you're now skiing, the developers have really opened up the variety of different paths and challenges that you can take. And sometimes you think you can spot something that you might be able to cut out a corner on, and you go for it and you grossly fail, or you overestimate the speed that you're going to gain by trying to drop down a hill. It really made it more exploratory than the original game, but therefore more engrossing and actually slightly more difficult to get to grips with. But I relished the challenge. The handling and physics of this game is sublime. There's two different ways that you can control it, being screen specific by using the left analog stick to go up, down, left and right and kind of point your rider in that direction. Or you can do it so that it's from the rider's or skier's perspective. So it can mean that as you're going down the slope, left is right and right is left. Both worked fine for me, and the mountains that we're on have very different setups and different challenges. There's an easy and like a hard mode of each mountain trail as well. And depending on which stats you hit, you can then unlock the next trail or some additional clobber that you can then kit out and customise your ski rider with. Coming with all of that is the online leaderboards too, which I always loved in the original Lonely Mountains, and I still go back to that game to this day. This will be a day one for me, especially because I believe it also brings multiplayer where you're all racing together down a mountain, and I think that would be a fantastic addition too. The next game on my list is Crystal Ball Critters, and I was looking forward to the look of this because it felt like it was going to be a hamster rolling ball kart racer game, and it is, but it really plays awfully, and I'll try and explain why, or at least not to my taste is probably the better way to say this. The way how each of the tracks are laid out, they're laid out in a way to try and antagonise each player and get them very frustrated. So one track has constant fire lasers and gun turrets just shooting at you to blast your ball and make it roll off of the track. And that comes to the point where as you get to the end of the level, you're supposed to then blast through all of these different lasers, but you can't actually physically do it. And I couldn't actually complete the level because there's so much blasting going on, there's no way you can avoid it. And this then continued into the next track where I was supposed to find a key and try and get to an exit, but the game didn't load the track properly, so I kept getting stuck in an environment that I couldn't get out of. And that repeatedly happened over and over again, with intermittent crashes constantly all the time, and despite there being a single player practice mode, it kept booting me out because I didn't have a constant stable internet connection. For me, that is a death knell for anything to do with these games at all. But on top of that, the handling was really wobbly and imprecise, and it was momentum based, so it was as if you was like building rolling ball momentum of a boulder. But because everything kept attacking you and trying to push you off the way, you didn't ever feel like you was truly in control of what you was doing. And that was me on my own. God knows how that would play if you've got multiple people trying to battle at once and firing off different attacks at you. It was too chaotic, but also to the point where it felt almost luck-based as to whether or not you'd get out the other side. And that doesn't make a good racer. And so for me, I didn't bother keeping Crystal Ball Critters on my wish list, and I was very sad about that. The next game on this list is KartMania Silver. And this looked like an approachable kart racer for 1 to 4 players locally, and it does play relatively well, but there's just so many other kart games that do this better. And so it's really difficult to recommend something like this because the graphics are okay. They have a PS2/early PS3 vibe to them, which I quite like. The handling is consistent and benign, so it doesn't really feel like it's under or oversteering. But what you are able to do is then drift and then charge yourself up for boosts and try and push yourself forward. And the other thing, just referencing back to Crystal Ball Critters, where there was lots of things attacking you constantly all the time, KartMania Silver suffers from similar things, where the tracks are so wide that they don't really pose a threat from a driving perspective. So instead they just throw loads of like aliens trying to hit you with beams or bouncing balls that are just going to fly across in your path. And because they're throwing so much at it, it doesn't really feel like, again, you're in control of being able to be skillful enough to avoid some of these things. And so you've got that going on, but the game also feels slow and easy. And it's a real juxtaposition that doesn't lie nicely together in terms of a game design for me. And so, again, KartMania Silver didn't stay on my wish list, but it was one of the closer ones to staying because it didn't do anything wrong. But there are so many other games out there that do this so much better and slicker. And I appreciate this is an early access like demo release, but I didn't think that what was here could be polished to a degree where I'd actually recommend this as a kart game. This is looking suspiciously 5 out of 10 across the board. Next on the list is Ball Race Party, and my thoughts on this is definitely needs more time in the oven, but potential is here. And the idea behind this is that you are racing marble balls around various different like toy environments, and I really like the aesthetic of this. I think it's charming from a Micro Machine style way of building out levels with a toy bedroom, for example, but spread around the house. The fun with this is that the single player mode is you against the track, but also the online leaderboard, and you'll constantly want to get yourself higher up the order, and that definitely has a one more go appeal to it. The online mode is interesting too because it's you against lots of other players on very long but also very sparse in terms of checkpoint race for you to try and get to the end. And because these tracks are all very narrow, and because the physics are super floaty, and I mean, like, you think you're going to try and slow down and put the brakes on your marble, nothing happens. And so you just ride up the edge of the curve of something and fly off constantly. And so it was very rare that I ever got my marble up to full speed because it was too much of a faff to then try and bring it back down again before a corner. It was easier to just kind of let it roll and drift your way around some bits and bobs. But also the physics don't seem like they're playing nice either. When you're getting onto elevators that take you up and down, or when you're trying to roll uphill, the game's constantly thinking that you've just hit it from a jump. And so it's kind of going boo, 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 audibly, but you can see it on the physics as well, where it's like, I don't like this. And so that was causing me a lot of pain. And so was some of the level design, where it's blatantly trying to almost push you into the rage quit territory often. And so if you're trying to do that online, that's only going to appeal to a certain demographic, and sadly that's not me. And so whilst I do think Ball Race Party has potential and it needs more time in the oven, which is fair because it's a demo on Steam Next Fest, I haven't kept it on my wish list, but I will probably return back to this to see how it's developed over time. You'll be delighted to know the next game has stayed on my wish list though. And that's Bike Baron: The Art of Riding 2. And my comment on this is Joe Danger, the third sequel we never got. And this is because it is high octane Trials / Joe Danger in a 2D environment with lots and lots of explosions and smashing your head up against a wall and falling off the bike, hitting landmines, lots of moving contraptions for you to try and time jumps and blasting your way through. And the thing feels fast, but it's also responsive and quite exacting in how it hits all of the different physics that it's trying to do. And when a game like this, where you're motorbiking and doing stunts on the way, plays fair and consistent, they become an absolute joy to play. And that's what Bike Baron: The Art of Riding 2 became. The demo itself was great. It did constantly crash at the end of every level. And so what I'd had to do was quit out and go back in again. Now I'm hoping that obviously that will get fixed whenever this game comes out for release, because there's plenty of fun to be had here, including online leaderboards. And that was quite fun because it was placing the next person a few tiers up the online leaderboard in as a ghost for you to try and beat, and you were given checkpoint marks against it. It was making me competitive in the demo, and that's always a good sign for these types of games. So absolutely, Bike Baron: The Art of Riding 2 on my wish list. Potential for day one, so long as it's a game that's actually capable of working. Next up is Winch It Out, and this is trying to modernise and adultise, I guess, it's not even a word, the Snuggle Truck, the Fantasia games, the 2D driving games where you're trying to use physics to get as far as possible and as quick as possible across like a bumpy environment, so to speak. And usually these games contain fuel and you'll run out before you get there, or you might just run out of power and you're not able to get up the hill. But what this does is it takes away that kind of incremental bettering of your car to get further and replaces it with a 5-speed gearbox where you manually have to select your gears. And so if you're trying to get up a steep hill, going into low gears gives you the grunt to get up it slowly, and when you're trying to go bombing downhill to get over a jump, you need to go into the high gears to make sure you hit those top speeds. And the other thing that you can do as well is to use a winch to try and winch yourself out of a problem. The key problem for this with me was it felt, again, imprecise and confusing, and a lot of this related to its braking mechanics. The brake didn't seem to work whenever you was going down a hill and you just skidded forward anyway. And then it added in a parking brake, but the parking brake didn't work anyway. And so whenever it was trying to get me to do this as part of the demo, I kept just smashing into the floor because something fundamentally for me wasn't working with the parking brake. And so it stopped me really getting very far with the demo at all, and I got frustrated and quit out. The game, I think, definitely has potential. I just don't think it was for me, and so it's not on my wish list going forward, but I wish it all the best. A game that has stayed on my wish list, and don't worry, the next couple are all staying, are Formula 2D Steer to Persevere. And this is a comedy version of Ultimate Racing 2D2, where someone has picked up every meme going on the current F1 grid, renamed all of the drivers and teams from it, taken a discount Gunter Steiner picture and tried to make that into a career management mode, where you'll spend money to upgrade your facilities and therefore upgrade the attributes of your car to then go racing. The cool thing around this was that there's full one-lap qualifying, and then there's 3 different tyre compounds for a 6-lap race and you have to pit during it. Weather does play a part, but I must say I didn't really notice much difference between wet and dry and even staying on the right tyres. But there's something definitely here where this game stands out both from a personality perspective, but it was also fun to drive. It felt skiddy in a way that Super Sprint does, and less grippy compared to, say, what Ultimate Racing 2D2 does. And I know that this top-down 2D F1 style subgenre of gaming is quite crowded, and there's some fantastic titles here. And whilst I don't think Formula 2D Steer to Persevere will be quite the top echelon of that, I think it's made a case for me that I would probably still pick this up because it was fun and engaging and stupid whilst also being quite playable, and so that's a thumbs up from me. Next up is Pedalverse, and this was giving me BMX downhill domination vibes from the PS1 era. But what was interesting with this game is the demo itself just gave you an open world environment for you to pedal around and muck about with. And so the demo doesn't really sell the game particularly well. It sells the idea of a game. And that's what really hooked me in, because bombing along at speed from the handlebars camera was visceral and really almost like Twitch sensitivity, where you were trying to dodge through trees, and the more you went off the beaten path, the more chaotic the game became. What I also really liked about this is that you could control the day and night cycle and put on different weather effects. And so you could go for nighttime and have a giant thunderstorm and barely see where you're going. You could have it so that it was constantly moving around, and so as dawn broke it would then get dry. But then like puddled water would appear from when the rain had come, and you would be splashing through it. And so the world felt lived in and was reacting to the environment that I was creating. And it just felt expansive and quite freeing to go on that free play ride. And so I question what actually you'll be doing in the full game and what else it has to offer. But the physics and the environment demonstrated that there is great seeds here for a game to be built inside it. And so that's what sold Pedalverse for me, and that's why it stayed on my wish list. I'm really intrigued to see how this develops. The next game is absolutely staying on my wish list because it is crazy, stupid and fun, and it's Turbo Dismount 2. It's been a decade, I think, since the original Turbo Dismount came out, and it's one of those games that I've had probably installed for almost all of that decade, and I always dip in and out of it for just a couple of minutes to just cause some carnage and feel good about life, watching that poor little ragdoll just get absolutely beaten to death as we watch all of the cars explode. And Turbo Dismount 2 is just more of the same, better refined, lots of fun to play with the environment to build up levels how you want them to, but also you can then just go free drone camera and watch the carnage unfold, and the level designs seem really good and fun, and they're alluding to the fact that they were all built using the same tools that a player will be able to build something out of for the Steam Workshop. So chaos, carnage, confusion, all set to a beautiful classical soundtrack, watching everything explode whilst opera goes off in the background. It's my kind of humour and I absolutely love it. So Turbo Dismount 2, big 2 hearty thumbs up for me. Can't wait to get going when it comes out. The next game on this list I can barely put any footage on. It's called Camelbirds. This hasn't stayed on my wish list because I couldn't get the demo working, because every time you pressed to start a race, the game crashed. Every single time, no matter what controller or keyboard setting or mouse setting you used, whether you went online or went into tutorial or solo mode, whenever you pressed go, the game crashed. The idea is that you race Camelbirds on their backs and try and go on like a rodeo horse race with these Camelbirds, and that sounds really great, but I couldn't experience any of it whatsoever, and so it was uninstalled and removed from my wish list. The next game on this list really should probably be in the local multiplayer game mode, but I just wanted to stick it in case I can't get round to doing that video, and it's Battle Mountain. It's a 1 to 6 player racing, ascending, climbing, platforming game where a camera will pan and you need to stay on it as you platform around. But you can also punch and kick and kill everyone else as you run around and try and kick them off the screen. Everyone has a set amount of lives, so if you run out of lives before you reach the summit, then in it's game over. And then if you do reach the summit, you have to be the first one to collect the crown at the end to win. And whilst this isn't technically full-on racing, you are racing because you can pretty much play like platform parkour racing only and get to the end. So I really enjoyed just mucking about the single player mode where you were just trying to ascend it and learn the course. I really am quite keen to play this in local multiplayer or going online, and Battle Mountain I think will shine, and absolutely it stayed on my wish list. Also staying on my wish list, which I was really surprised at, is Peachy Derby, because this plays actually quite well. This is a runner style game, but everyone seems to be like magical bunny-eared, like scantily clad ladies. Of course it is. There is fan service aplenty here, and it was why I was like, this game's going to be dodgy. But actually it plays quite well, begrudgingly. The idea behind this is that you are trying to reach the Derby Day so that you can then run and win a championship of sorts. And there's lots of story and visual-y novelty bits, but you can choose to skip them entirely and just get straight into the racing, which plays very similar to a kart racer, but just everyone is running. You can do little mini hop jumps, which is quite cool, but outside of that it's about collecting coins, drifting around corners and going across boost pads so that you can then build up boost speed and go even faster. Lots of weapons to chuck at each other. A lot of them feel like they've come from a shinobi style background where you're throwing shurikens and like disappearing into a tornado of wind so that you can spiral off and not be hit by other people, or you can just roll into a snowball and try and bomb over the top of people and knock them out of your way. It was fun, it was stupid, it was everything I expected it was going to be, but much more playable, and so it stayed on my wish list because I think this will be one of those brain disengage, just play for a few minutes and then return back to it another day and do another little bit. This isn't going to be a hardcore playing game. The last game on this list is Sno Ultimate Freeriding, which isn't technically a racing or a driving game, but you are bombing at speed down a hill. Free riding, trying to do stunts and collecting points. I really liked the easy and responsive and really majestic way of how the free riding takes place and the way how you can cut into different corners. Doing a callback to the beginning of this video where we had Lonely Mountain Snow Riders, that's nailed this art of making drifting and steering into your turn to slow yourself down look beautiful but feel right. And it's a difficult feeling to convey, but it's just that the physics make sense, and they do in Sno Ultimate Freeriding too. However, you will be knocked off of your skis every 5 seconds, and it takes a little while to kind of get yourself up to speed and then feel confident about bombing down the hill. It's speedy, it's responsive, you've got to have your wits about you because everything's about to knock you off and make a game over. But it was great fun, and my only regret with this is that the demo is really, really short and it's distance specific. So once you get into a rhythm, you're thinking, yeah, I'm bombing it. The demo comes to an end. And I was like, wah. But I guess the demo does its job because I wanted more, and it's absolutely stayed on my wish list. And I'll be definitely picking it up. And that brings us to the end of a very mixed bag, unfortunately, of racing and driving and going very fast games. About half of these I don't think should be in Steam Next Fest, and I think my takeaway from this, and it's quite rare that I feel quite like meh after having played lots of demos because I get so excited about games all the time. The reason why a lot of these games just didn't work for me is that it feels like it's pushing out a playtest as a demo, and it's probably best not to do that in a 3,000 demo crowded Steam Next Fest where everyone's screaming for attention. Because if your demo crashes every 30 seconds, or it just doesn't launch at all, or actually something is clearly not been tested beyond the developer themselves for any kind of other pairs of eyes, it might be better to launch that in a slightly separate standalone thing outside of a Next Fest environment. so that people were a bit more forgiving with it. Because what I didn't have the time to do was to invest time in games where I was like, oh, this is really frustrating and annoying to play. How do I rewire my brain to try and make it better? Because there's 3,000 demos for me to try and pick out what ones I want to play and get through. And so your time for impact is really, really tiny. If it doesn't work nicely out of the bag, I'll have to skip it and dive on to the next. And that's the harsh reality of taking part in a Steam Next Fest. Big rewards if you get it right. Really, really bad negativity implications about your product if you get it horribly wrong. And so that's the lesson for today. Let me know if any of these games appealed to you down in the comments, and thank you so much for watching. Higher Plane Games is part of the Higher Plane Network, a completely independent media outlet supported by people like you. The goal is to create the best possible content that cultivates a richer indie scene for games as well as music and entertainment. To find out more and to get involved, visit patreon.com/higherplane-network. Your support makes all the difference, and in return you'll gain access to bonus content and downloads. Thank you for watching.